Hello, everyone. So let's continue going through the book of Daniel. I know that we're making some speed, some haste through these earlier chapters. There will come a slowdown because we're going to get into some heavier topics. But for now, it's kind of interesting that we encounter, just like we did with Daniel 3 and the fiery furnace, we saw a lot of imagery tied to the book of Revelation via the king requiring people to worship an image made in the likeness of a man under threat of death. Now, that is not what Revelation is about, not specifically about Nebuchadnezzar, but there will come a point where there will be a king who will require, by the hand of the false prophet who comes alongside him, that the people, Nebuchadnezzar, built his own statue and required people to worship it. But in the end times, the people, the false prophet, will deceive or cause the people to build a statue to a guy and worship it upon threat of death. If they get killed for not worshiping it, not worshiping the beast, the image of the beast, or taking the mark of the beast, then they're eventually going to be resurrected to live forever in a glorified state, immortal, incorruptible. That was kind of the proving point of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego not worshiping the statue, was that their reward would come at the end of it. They might have endured a trial. God was with them through it, and they were obviously better off at the end of it for not having done that. But there was a similarity between Daniel 3 and this image and this forced worship under threat of death to what we read about in Revelation that will become important at the midpoint of the week and beyond. What's also interesting is that Nebuchadnezzar is a foreshadow of the beast that Revelation 13 talks about as well. That the anti-God aspect of the end time, specifically the midpoint of the weekend after, will be at the helm of the beast. Nebuchadnezzar starts this chapter by paying lip service to God. And then when his feet are put to the fire, what happens? He's like, oh, I'm so great. I did all this. This is mine. And God is completely not in the picture. What happens as a result of that? Well, Nebuchadnezzar gets judged, just like the beast will. Because what do we learn about the beast in Revelation? What are we going to learn specifically about the beast in Daniel? Because of the great words that the little horn spake. He opens his mouth in blasphemy against God, to blaspheme his name, his tabernacle, them that dwell in heaven. The king shall do according to his will. He shall exalt himself and magnify himself above every god, shall speak marvelous things against the God of gods. And what's going to happen? His body going to be given to the burning flame. So there's a lot of similarity that we learn about in Daniel 3 and Daniel 4 about Nebuchadnezzar and his actions, his activity, to the book of Revelation. Now, again, Revelation is not talking about Nebuchadnezzar. It's just talking about similar things. Daniel 4, not 5. Daniel 4:1, Nebuchadnezzar, the king, unto all people, nations, and languages that dwell on the earth, peace be multiplied unto you. I thought it good to show the signs and wonders that the high God hath wrought toward me. How great are his signs, and how mighty are his wonders. His kingdom is an everlasting kingdom, and his dominion is from generation to generation. I, Nebuchadnezzar, was at rest in mine house, and flourishing in my palace, prospering. I saw a dream which made me afraid, and the thoughts upon my bed and the visions of my head troubled me, kind of like he was woken from a sleep and couldn't get back to it in Daniel 2, where he had the dream of the statue, and Daniel came and interpreted it for him. So Daniel's going to interpret this one for him as well, but this one is not going to sit well with Daniel. He's going to be troubled by it and not really want to tell Nebuchadnezzar what it's about because it's not favorable to him. But it serves as a warning, and that warning is not heeded. I saw a dream which made me afraid, and the thoughts upon my bed and the visions of my head troubled me. Therefore made I a decree to bring in all the wise men of Babylon before me, that they might make known unto me the interpretation of the dream. Didn't he learn his lesson in Daniel 2? He should have just went straight to Daniel. Then came in the magicians and astrologers, the Chaldeans and the soothsayers, and I told the dream before them, but they did not make known unto me the interpretation thereof. But at the last, Daniel came in before me, whose name was Belshazzar, whatever, according to the name of my God, and in whom is the spirit of the holy gods. And before him I told the dream, saying, remember, this is Nebuchadnezzar writing this, speaking these words. So he gave Daniel a Babylonian name to honor his own gods. Oh, Belteshazzar. It's technically not Belshazzar, but whatever. Master of the magicians, because I know the spirit of the holy gods is in thee. No, the spirit of the holy God is in him, not the Babylonian holy gods, little g gods. And no secret troubleth thee. Tell me the visions of my dream that I have seen and the interpretation thereof. Thus were the visions of mine head in my bed. I saw and behold a tree in the midst of the earth, and the height thereof was great. The tree grew and was strong, and the height thereof reached into heaven, and the sight thereof to the end of all the earth. The leaves thereof were fair, the fruit thereof much, and in it was meat for all. The beasts of the field had shadow under it, the fowls of the heaven dwelt in the boughs thereof, and all flesh was fed of it. I saw in the visions of my head upon my bed, and behold, a watcher and an holy one came down from heaven. He cried aloud and said thus, hew down the tree, and cut off his branches, shake off his leaves, and scatter his fruit. Let the beasts get away from under it, and the fowls from his branches. Nevertheless, leave the stump of his roots in the earth, even with a band of iron and brass in the tender grass of the field, and let it be wet with the dew of heaven, and let his portion be with the beasts in the grass of the earth. Let his heart be changed from man's, and let a beast's heart be given unto him, and let 7 times pass over him. This matter is by the decree of the watchers, and the demand by the word of the holy ones, to the intent that the living may know the Most High ruleth in the kingdom of men, and giveth it to whomsoever he will, and setteth up over it the basest of men. This dream I, King Nebuchadnezzar, have seen. Now thou, O Belteshazzar, declare the interpretation thereof, for as much as all the wise men of my kingdom are not able to make known unto me the interpretation, but thou art able, for the spirit of the holy gods is in thee. Then Daniel, whose name was Belteshazzar, was astonished for 1 hour, and his thoughts troubled him. The king spake and said, let not the dream or the interpretation thereof trouble thee. Daniel answered, or Belshazzar answered and said, my lord, the dream be to them that hate thee, and the interpretation thereof to thine enemies. So they wanted to bring Nebuchadnezzar low. And Daniel knew that that was the interpretation of it. And he's like, I don't want to tell you because it's not favorable to you. This is what your enemies would wish for you. The tree that thou sawest, which grew and was strong, whose height reached into the heaven, and the sight thereof to all the earth, whose leaves were fair, and the fruit thereof much, and in it was meat for all, under which the beasts of the field dwelt, and upon whose branches the fowls of the heaven had their habitation. It is thou, O king, that art grown and become strong. For thy greatness is grown and reaches unto heaven, and thy dominion to the ends of the earth. So he's been favored. He's been blessed. And there are people who would wish him to not be good, to be brought low, to be ruined. Whereas the king saw a watcher and a holy one coming down from heaven. He's talking about angels. And saying, hew down the tree, cut down Belshazzar. Destroy his kingdom that provides provision for himself, his people, his animals. Destroy his kingdom. Lay him even with the ground and make him no better than the beasts of the field. That's what his enemies wanted for him. Whereas the king saw a watchman and holy one come down from heaven and saying, hew down the tree and destroy it, yet leave the stump of the roots thereof in the earth, even with a band of iron and brass, and the tender grass of the field, and let it be wet with the dew of heaven, and let the portion be with the beasts of the field till 7 times pass over him. 7 seasons, 7 years. This is the interpretation, O king, and this is the decree of the Most High, which has come upon my lord the king. That they shall drive thee from men, and thy dwelling place shall be with the beasts of the field, and they shall make thee to eat grass as oxen, and they shall wet thee with the dew of heaven, and 7 times, or 7 seasons, 7 years shall pass over thee, till thou know that the Most High ruleth in the kingdom of men, and giveth it to whomsoever he will. What does that sound reminiscent of? The 7 years till it takes you to recognize that Jesus is Lord over all the earth. Like disbelieving Jews in Israel in the end times, who go into the 70th week thinking they're great, that their Messiah is there, and they worship him, and they build this temple, and he's there with them, but it's not the real guy, it's the false guy. And they'll be brought low over the course of 7 years. Only by the grace of God will a remnant be spared, because they'll finally get it. Like I said, very much similarity between the book of Daniel and the end times. Even if it's not specifically about that, it's a type and shadow. Whereas they commanded to leave the stump of the tree roots, thy kingdom shall be sure unto thee. After that thou shalt have known that the heavens do rule. Wherefore, O king, let my counsel be acceptable unto thee, and break off thy sins by righteousness. He's like, get yourself right while you still can. And thine iniquities by showing mercy to the poor, if it may be a lengthening of thy tranquility. So this hasn't happened yet. This is a dream about what's going to happen if Nebuchadnezzar doesn't straighten up. Stop worshiping his Babylonian gods and start worshiping the God of heaven, to whom he just paid lip service. But when it comes down to it, who does he really honor? At the end of 12 months, he walked in the palace of the kingdom of Babylon. And the king spake and said, is not this great Babylon that I have built for the house of the kingdom by the might of my power and for the honor of my majesty? He began the chapter by honoring or seeming to honor the God of Daniel, capital G God. But when it came down to it, and he was prosperous, and he had everything going for him, who did he pay deference to? Who did he pay homage to? Who did he honor? Himself. While the word was in the king's mouth, there fell a voice from heaven saying, O King Nebuchadnezzar, to thee it is spoken, the kingdom is departed from thee. See, we learned in Daniel 2, the dream and the vision that he had that came to him, woke him up, and only Daniel could interpret it. The dream of the statue. Remember, there were 4 kingdoms, similar to the 4 beasts that we will come across again in Daniel 7. The head of gold, which represented Babylon, and the breast and arms of silver, the belly of brass, and the legs and feet of iron and clay. 4 kingdoms. Nebuchadnezzar was happy when Daniel interpreted it, and he gave him seat and authority and power over people. And I have to think that he didn't understand that Babylon would be taken over in his lifetime or near to. Maybe he thought that it was in the distant future and he just didn't care. That at that precise point in time, he was the king over the world empire. And yeah, it would fall to the Medo-Persians, the silver, and eventually to Greece, the brass, and eventually to the beast kingdom in the end times, which is the one that exists when Jesus comes back to defeat. So I have to think that because he was so happy to have the interpretation and he treated Daniel so well afterward, that he didn't understand the nearness of that defeat. This is the place where Nebuchadnezzar loses his rule. And in the next chapter, we will see where Babylon loses its rule. At the time it loses its rule, his son Belshazzar, not Belteshazzar, Daniel, just Belshazzar, or Belshazzar, whatever. Nebuchadnezzar's king, or Nebuchadnezzar's son, will take over as king. And it is under his son that the Medo-Persian Empire comes to destroy Babylon and overtake it. The silver overtakes the gold in the statue progression. But this, when Nebuchadnezzar had the opportunity to pay homage and deference to the God of Daniel, he chose to pay it to himself instead. So what does God say? I forewarned you. I gave you a dream. I told you don't do it. And you did it. Now the kingdom is departed from you. And they shall drive thee from men, and thy dwelling shall be with beasts of the field. They shall make thee to eat grass as oxen, and 7 years, 7 times, 7 seasons shall pass over thee, until thou know that the Most High ruleth in the kingdom of men, and giveth it to whomsoever he will. All you had to do was recognize that, and you did not. The same hour was the thing fulfilled upon Nebuchadnezzar, and he was driven from men, did eat grass as oxen, and his body was wet with the dew of heaven, till his hairs were grown like eagle's feathers, and his nails like bird's claws. He became a beast. At the end of the days, I, Nebuchadnezzar, lifted up mine eyes unto heaven, and mine understanding returned unto me, and I blessed the Most High, and I praised and honored him that liveth forever, whose dominion is an everlasting dominion, and his kingdom is from generation to generation. All the inhabitants of the earth are reputed as nothing, and he doeth according to his will in the army of heaven and among the inhabitants of the earth. And none can stay his hand or say unto him, what doest thou? At the same time, my reason returned unto me, and for glory of my kingdom, mine honor and brightness returned unto me, and my counselors, my Lord, sought unto me, and I was established in my kingdom, and excellent majesty was added unto me. So maybe he resumed. Someone took his place during that time period, so he probably had a co-regent, whatever. Now I, Nebuchadnezzar, praise and extol and honor the King of heaven, all whose works are truth and his ways judgment, and those that walk in pride he is able to abase or bring low. When next we meet again, we'll go through Daniel 5, and we will be welcomed to or introduced to Nebuchadnezzar's son, who is the reigning king at that time. And this is where the Babylonian Empire will meet its end. And the Medo-Persian Empire will replace it, which is where Daniel begins to understand timing, receiving night visions about the kingdoms and the kings and the end times and the sequence of events and the timing of all of the sequence of events. But Belshazzar the king, who replaces Nebuchadnezzar, we will be introduced to him in the next chapter. So as always, if you guys have questions, comments, or feedback, let me know. See you later.